Hello there. I have some more material on the relationship and mutual understanding of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. I'll read that out a little later. I'm going to start with this diagram of two Enneagrams that is mentioned in Rina Hands' book. She says, the next morning, and this was when she was with Gurdjieff in his apartment in Paris after the war, the next morning was spent doing what I had come to do, going with the non-French speakers to buy petrol and change money. As we went along, there was a solemn talk about the two Enneagrams on the salon wall, preposterously outlined, one in blue and one in red glass, mounted on black velvet. One was properly hung, but the other was on its side. Why? What could this mean? I suggested it might be just for this reason, to make one wonder, but no one liked this simple idea, and all were scandalized at my further suggestion that it might just have slipped out of place. Well, I don't know exactly what these Enneagrams look like, nor the angle of rotation or relative position of the two diagrams, so I've just made a little guess here, in that, in a very simple way, there is a place where there is an entry point in the Enneagram for material from the outside, and I guess it goes from the man to the woman. It's that simple. But like I said, if you look at these diagrams, maybe they're interesting for you, but I have no authority to say that this is what was actually hanging on the salon wall of Gurdjieff's apartment, okay? Now, I came across a book by a man called Rom Landau, and he had interviewed both Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, and I'll just read out a little bit of those interviews. When he was with Ouspensky, Rom Landau asks, "Do you mean the enigmatic Gurdjieff from Fontainebleau, whose name I constantly come across without, however, being able to locate or indeed to verify him?" Ouspensky: "I don't think there can be two Gurdjieffs. Many important truths unknown to any other system were explained through the system propagated by Gurdjieff, for of course it was not Gurdjieff's own discovery, but an esoteric system which had been entrusted to him by others." So here we see Ouspensky saying that Gurdjieff's work is not his own work, that Gurdjieff was a custodian of somebody else's knowledge, which completely goes against the fourth way, because the fourth way ideas are that knowledge comes from your inner being only. The only transfer that is possible is through your own work in developing yourself until such point as your being can understand. So Ouspensky is wrong in many different ways, and I think he's simply giving a rationale for taking Gurdjieff's words, going to England and setting up shop and becoming his own teacher and teaching Gurdjieff's words. But of course Ouspensky's attitude that words can exist alone is reflected in what he actually did, which is fail. And I can only imagine that Ouspensky, although he struggled with himself to sort of stay with Gurdjieff, he must have had some very strong eyes, false personality that was obviously very intellectually crystallized and arrogant, and he had a certain image of himself being extremely important. And so he was never really willing to let that go and actually do what Gurdjieff said or respect the words. Now later on, Mr. Landau visits Gurdjieff. I believe this is in America. And Landau asks, is Ouspensky's teaching, in your opinion, original or based on yours, or do you consider him the most important of all your former followers? I continued as though I had not noticed his impatience. Gurdjieff: he just been one of my pupils, one of 1,000, 10,000. I always write 3 versions. Only last is for publication. No one knows last one, only myself. Others are here and there and here. They all have them, and then begin their own teaching on them. But that means nothing. I have pupils all across the world, in all countries. Groups are everywhere. In England alone, 15. In 15 cities, and all try to do new teaching on my teaching. But means nothing, just nothing. He snapped his fingers in a gesture of contempt. Gurdjieff said to the salesman that a nucleus had to be formed. But a nucleus of what? If you, as I do, spend far too much time reading people's blogs and social media accounts and listening to all sorts of fourth-way stuff around on the internet, which I'm sure is a terrible place to find out anything real. But what is obvious to me is that not a single person is able to elucidate or apply Gurdjieff's ideas in their lives, nor do they even attempt to. Well, some people, it is true, at least have the respect to read his work, but there is a rather large gap, especially with modern people, where they are unable to understand how to do any inner yogic exercises or feel anything inside. It's so unfamiliar that I think the only possible way is for a teacher to stand in front of you and make you do various inner exercises. And I personally did a hell of a lot, especially via Osho, who made all sorts of Western people do all sorts of Eastern practices, which was incredible. And Osho modeled himself on Gurdjieff, and correctly, I think, because he forced people to do all sorts of things, from singing, screaming, prana work, tai chi, ancient Indian exercises. It was all fantastic. And my own teacher had a spell through Osho, and Osho was certainly a very great teacher, which, by the way, is why he is somewhat vanished from the face of the earth. That's how things are here. Ouspensky has 2 lineages coming from him. The first lineage, if it even exists, are people who read In Search of the Miraculous, understand that this is a description, a very accurate description that is meant to be taken up by a yogi to practice. And I don't know if there are any people who are like that. And then you have the other Ouspensky tradition, which is the way Ouspensky sat in groups. Everybody sat around Ouspensky, mostly from the literati, people who like reading books, and they sit quietly until people say magic words. I think I've mentioned this before, but as the higher emotional center seems to be the next one up from where human beings are, then a sense of devotion is critical as a gateway to going from man number 5 upwards, or from to become a spiritual person. To enter the vertical dimension, I think, begins with devotion. So all those people who don't like praying and who want some sort of technical, atheistic, mechanistic path are in error. It doesn't work like that. You cannot avoid your heart. Now, I have been interested in learning about carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen. Everything that I have seen on this subject is rather like everything I've seen on the subject of the Enneagram. It is dead. People only repeat the material in the book and do not feel it, do not really understand it. So I'm interested. I don't know if I can do it yet, but let's see what my being can do if it is able to feel inwardly and therefore apply that model. But the reason why I mention it here is because Ouspensky said something, and I'm just going to read it out because I think it says a lot about Ouspensky. He says, Carbon-12 may have many different manifestations, but generally we speak about it in relation to impressions. It is probably some energy of the emotional center, but the important thing is not the source. What is important is how to bring it. What it is and where it comes from does not matter, because we cannot see it. What the fuck is that about? Here, Ouspensky is saying that he has no interest whatsoever in feeling these things inside of him. And therefore he fails. What he's really saying there is that he wants to remain inside his mind, circulating ideas. And this reminds me of one final thing that I've got from Gurdjieff. I believe this comes from Landau's book again. It says,